Just before dawn, Hanul Prestige Medical Institute was already alive. Soft lights reflected across polished marble floors while nurses moved briskly between trauma bays. Beyond the towering glass walls, Seoul's skyline shimmered beneath a pale blue morning sky. An ambulance screeched to a halt beneath the emergency entrance. The doors burst open. "Male, 58, a paramedic shouted. "Multi-vehicle collision. Massive blood loss. Blood pressure dropping." The trauma team sprang into action. Standing at the center was Dr. Amina Bello. She looked younger than almost everyone around her. Her caramel complexion glowed beneath the emergency lights, her natural curls neatly secured beneath a surgical cap. Her white coat hung over navy blue scrubs, and a stethoscope rested around her neck. A worried woman rushed beside the stretcher. "My husband," she cried. She looked frantically around the room before her eyes settled on Amina. "I'm sorry," she said breathlessly. "Can you find the doctor?" Amina answered calmly. "I am the attending physician." The woman blinked. "You?" Before Amina could respond, another voice interrupted. A visiting orthopedic consultant had just entered the trauma bay. He glanced toward her and frowned. "Where's Professor Yoon?" A nurse answered. "He's upstairs." The consultant looked back at Amina. "So, who's supervising?" "I am." His eyebrows lifted. "You look barely older than my residents." Amina didn't react. Instead, she turned toward the patient. "Blood pressure? 80/50. Oxygen? 88. She nodded once. "Prepare massive transfusion." She gently examined the patient before studying the ultrasound images. "Internal bleeding." She looked toward one of the residents. "Call operating theater 3. Another doctor hesitated. "Shouldn't we wait for Professor Yoon?" Amina met his eyes. "If we wait," she said quietly, "he won't survive long enough to meet Professor Yoon." Silence. Then nurse manager Kim Hae-jin spoke firmly. "You heard Dr. Bello. Move." The room immediately erupted into coordinated motion. Within minutes, Amina had guided the team into surgery. Nearly 3 exhausting hours later, the operating room doors opened. The patient was alive, stable. As the relieved family embraced each other, the visiting consultant quietly approached Nurse Kim. "I owe her an apology."
Kim similet feindly.
"You're not the first, and you won't be the last." Across the city, another morning unfolded very differently. Inside the Grand Lotus Convention Hall, Seoul's wealthiest business leaders gathered for an international charity foundation luncheon. Elegant crystal chandeliers glowed overhead. An orchestra played softly. Television cameras followed distinguished guests. Near the front sat Jang Do-hyun. Publicly, he was known as chairman of Mirong Global Logistics. Privately, very few understood the influence he carried. His reputation alone silenced most rooms. Yet today, he appeared unusually quiet. Security Director Kwon Sung-go noticed immediately. "You haven't touched your coffee." Do-hyun smiled faintly. "It tastes different." "It always tastes different when you're avoiding sleep." Before another word could be spoken, Do-hyun pressed a hand lightly against his chest. The discomfort he'd ignored for nearly 3 weeks returned. This time, it lingered. His breathing became slightly heavier. Kwon leaned closer. "Chairman?"
"I've fine."
Another sharp pain spread beneath his ribs.
Kwon didn't argue.
He discreetly signaled the security detail. Within moments, the event continued uninterrupted while Do-hyun was quietly escorted through a private exit. 20 minutes later, his convoy entered Hanul Prestige Medical Institute through the executive entrance. Hospital administrators immediately rushed forward. "Prepare the executive cardiac suite. Notify Professor Yoon. Call Dr. Park immediately." Luxury elevators carried the team directly to the hospital's private diagnostic floor. Within minutes, specialists surrounded the patient. Electrocardiograms, blood tests, cardiac imaging. The room filled with activity. Senior consultant Dr. Park Giziak confidently reviewed the first scan. He folded his arms. "It appears straightforward." Professor Yoon arrived moments later. "What do we have?" "Likely severe coronary obstruction." Dr. Park replied confidently. "We should prepare surgery as soon as possible." Across the room, Dr. Amina quietly reviewed the digital images on another monitor. Something bothered her. The anatomy looked unusual. She enlarged the scan, then compared it with another angle. The vessel pattern didn't quite match the diagnosis everyone seemed certain about. She frowned slightly, not because she believed everyone else was wrong, but because something remained unanswered. The executive consultation room overlooked the Han River. Morning sunlight reflected across polished walnut furniture while several senior physicians reviewed the scans. Dr. Park addressed the patient confidently. Chairman Jiang, I recommend immediate surgery. The blockage is significant. We shouldn't delay. The room nodded in agreement. Only Amina remained silent. Professor, you noticed. Dr. Bello. She looked up. You've been studying those images for several minutes. She nodded respectfully. Yes, Professor. Do you disagree? She chose her words carefully. I don't disagree. I simply believe we don't yet have enough information. Several consultants exchanged amused glances. Dr. Park sighed. What additional information could possibly change this? Amina enlarged one section of the scan. The vessel branches here, she explained softly, don't follow the normal anatomical pattern. Professor Yoon leaned closer. She continued. If this represents what I think it might. She paused. Then operating immediately could expose the wrong structure. Dr. Park folded his arms. Based on one image?
No.
Based on the combination of all of them. The room fell quiet. Do Hyun watched the conversation without speaking. Unlike the others, Amina never once raised her voice. She wasn't trying to prove herself smarter. She simply wanted certainty. Finally, Do Hyun looked directly at her. If everyone left this room, he asked calmly, and the decision belonged only to you, what would you do? She answered without hesitation. I would request one specialized three-dimensional vascular scan. It will delay surgery by 30 minutes. And if I'm wrong, she added, you lose 30 minutes. But if I'm right, she glanced toward the monitor. It could completely change the operation. No one spoke.
Dr.
Park looked ready to object. Instead, Do Hyun made his decision. We wait. Professor, you nodded. Arrange the scan. 35 minutes later, the new images appeared on the enormous digital display. No one spoke. The room stared silently. There it was. A rare congenital vascular variation hidden beneath the original images. The suspected blockage was not the primary danger. Operating immediately using the original plan would have exposed the wrong artery and dramatically increased surgical risk. Professor Yoon slowly exhaled. In 37 years, he murmured, I've only seen this twice. Dr. Park lowered his eyes. For the first time that morning, he had no argument. Do Hyun looked toward Amina. You didn't ask me to trust your reputation. He smiled faintly. You asked me to trust your reasoning. She returned a quiet smile. In medicine, she replied, certainty is sometimes the greatest act of courage. Outside the consultation room, nurse manager Kim watched through the glass. She smiled to herself. Soon, the entire hospital would stop asking why someone so young had become a doctor. They would start asking how she had become one of the best. The advanced imaging suite fell into complete silence. The three-dimensional vascular reconstruction rotated slowly across the enormous diagnostic display, revealing every artery and vessel in remarkable detail. Professor Yoon Sukmin stepped closer, adjusting his glasses as he examined the glowing image. For several long moments, no one spoke. Finally, he looked toward Dr. Amina Bello. You were right. The words landed heavily inside the room. The congenital vascular variation was so rare that it could easily have been overlooked on conventional scans. The operation originally proposed by Dr. Park would not only have failed to correct the real problem, it could have caused catastrophic complications. One by one, the senior consultants leaned toward the monitor. Dr. Park Giziak stared at the image, his confidence replaced by quiet disbelief. I didn't even consider this possibility. Amina answered respectfully. Neither did I at first. I only became concerned because the symptoms didn't perfectly match the images. Professor Yoon smiled faintly. And instead of forcing the evidence to fit your conclusion, You questioned your conclusion. She nodded. Patients deserve certainty whenever possible. Across the room, Jang Do-hyun watched the exchange carefully. He had built multinational companies by studying people before making decisions. He noticed something that impressed him far more than Amina's diagnosis. She never looked proud. She never sought recognition. She wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. Her only concern had been protecting a patient. Professor Yoon folded his arms. We'll redesign the surgical plan immediately. He turned toward the operating team. I want every specialist briefed within 15 minutes. The room erupted into controlled activity. Surgeons gathered around digital displays. Perfusionists prepared specialized equipment. Nurses updated surgical protocols. Everyone suddenly moved with renewed urgency. As the meeting ended, Do-hyun quietly approached Amina. You saved me before touching a single instrument. She looked slightly surprised. I simply asked for another test.
No.
He smiled. You asked everyone to slow down. In my experience, that's much harder. Before she could answer, nurse manager Kim entered. Dr. Bello. The operating room is ready. Amina gave a respectful nod. I'll see you after surgery. Do-hyun replied calmly. I'll still be here. Operating Theater 1 stood beneath brilliant surgical lighting. The room was immaculate. Robotic assistance units surrounded the operating table. Advanced cardiac monitors illuminated the walls with soft green pulses. Every member of the surgical team understood the significance of today's procedure. Professor Yoon addressed the room. This operation changes because one physician refused to make assumptions. He glanced toward Amina. Let's honor that decision. The anesthesia team prepared the patient. The surgery began. For the first hour, everything progressed steadily. The unusual anatomy required movements measured in millimeters rather than centimeters. Each decision demanded extraordinary precision. Amina stood opposite Professor Yoon. She anticipated every instrument before it was requested. Microforceps. Already waiting. Vascular clamp. Already in position. Suction. Immediately delivered. Hours passed. Outside the operating suite, executives, security personnel, and hospital staff waited in anxious silence. Security Director Kwon Sung-go rarely paced.
Today.
He couldn't remain still. Inside the operating room, a monitor suddenly sounded. The patient's blood pressure dropped. Several younger residents looked toward Professor Yoon. Before anyone could panic, Amina quietly spoke. The vessel is twisting. Professor Yoon immediately followed her observation. He adjusted the surgical angle. Blood flow returned almost instantly. The room breathed again. Several nurses exchanged astonished glances. Another hour passed. Then another. Nearly 8 hours after the first incision, Professor Yoon carefully removed his gloves. The repair is complete. Silence. The monitors displayed a strong, steady rhythm. A heartbeat. Healthy.
Stable.
The operating room remained quiet for a moment before relieved smiles spread across exhausted faces. One of the younger residents whispered, "We actually did it." Professor Yoon looked toward Amina.
No.
He corrected gently. We did it because someone questioned certainty. Outside, the operating room doors slowly opened. Professor Yoon stepped into the waiting area. The surgery was successful. Relief swept through the corridor. Security officers relaxed. Hospital administrators smiled. Even Kwon allowed himself a rare sigh. Behind them, Dr. Park stood silently. He watched Amina emerge several minutes later. Her shoulders were tired. Her eyes reflected exhaustion. Yet she never looked toward the crowd waiting to congratulate her. She simply asked Nurse Kim, "How's the patient?"
Kim similet karmli.
Recovering beautifully. Only then did Amina allow herself to breathe. Mid-video CTA. If you're enjoying today's story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Stories like this remind us that real excellence isn't measured by age. It's revealed through wisdom, humility, and courage. And if you enjoy inspiring Korean drama stories filled with unforgettable characters and emotional twists, be sure to subscribe so you never miss the next powerful story. Morning sunlight poured across the hospital atrium 3 days later. News of the extraordinary operation had quietly spread throughout Hanul Prestige Medical Institute. Patients who had never met Dr. Amina Bello now requested consultations with her. Residents began arriving early just to observe her rounds. Instead of dramatic speeches, they found something unexpected. She listened. She explained. She encouraged questions. During one teaching session, a nervous first-year resident hesitated over a complex cardiac scan. "I don't want to answer incorrectly." Amina smiled reassuringly. Medicine isn't about pretending to know. It's about having the courage to keep asking. The resident relaxed immediately. Across the room, Professor Yoon watched unnoticed. He turned toward nurse manager Kim. Leadership can't be taught.
Kim noted.
But humility can inspire it. Later that afternoon, a quiet knock sounded on Amina's office door.
Come in.
Dr. Park entered. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, he bowed his head slightly. "I've spent 30 years believing experience alone guaranteed better judgment." He looked directly at her. "You reminded me that experience must continue learning. I underestimated you. I was wrong." Amina smiled kindly. "Then we've both gained something." He looked puzzled. "What did you gain?" She answered softly. "A colleague willing to see differently." For the first time in many years, Dr. Park laughed. Not out of embarrassment, but out of relief. The hospital had begun changing. Not because one doctor had won an argument, but because one young physician had quietly shown everyone that true authority isn't demanded. It's earned. 3 weeks after his surgery, Jang Do-hyun no longer looked like a man recovering from a life-threatening cardiac procedure. His strength had returned gradually, but his doctors still insisted he avoid long meetings and unnecessary stress. For perhaps the first time in years, he obeyed. That afternoon, he asked Security Director Kwon Sung-go to arrange a private meeting, not in a boardroom or executive office, but in Hanul Prestige Medical Institute's rooftop healing garden. The garden overlooked the Han River. Maple trees swayed gently in the breeze. Stone pathways wound through flowering shrubs, and the distant Seoul skyline shimmered beneath the late afternoon sun. Dr. Amina Bello arrived wearing a simple white physician's coat over navy blue scrubs. She had just finished morning rounds. "You wanted to see me?" Do-hyun stood from a wooden bench. "Thank you for coming." She smiled politely. "How are you feeling?" "My doctors say I'm becoming a difficult patient." She laughed softly. "That's usually a sign people are recovering." For a few moments, they simply walked through the peaceful garden. Finally, Do-hyun stopped beside a reflecting pool. "I've spent years investing in companies." He looked across the skyline. Factories. Shipping. Technology. "But I've realized something. The greatest investment isn't in buildings. It's in people." He turned toward her. "I want to establish a surgical innovation center here. A place where gifted young doctors receive opportunities based on ability, not age, influence, or connections." He handed her a slim presentation folder. "I'd like you to lead it." Amina didn't immediately open it. Instead, she studied him. "Why me?" "Because when everyone else saw your age, I saw your judgment." She remained silent for several seconds. Then she answered honestly. "I'll only accept if the center exists for patients first. No political appointments.
No favoritism.
No using young doctors for publicity." Do-hyun smiled. "That's exactly why I asked you." She extended her hand. "Then we have an agreement." Construction began almost immediately. Within months, one entire wing of Hanul Prestige Medical Institute was transformed into the Hanul Center for Surgical Innovation. The facility became unlike anything the hospital had built before. Advanced robotic surgery simulators, digital anatomy laboratories, artificial intelligence, training suites, research theaters, collaborative classrooms where professors and first-year residents worked side by side. More importantly, the culture changed. Applications arrived from across Asia, Europe, Africa, and North America. Every candidate completed anonymous practical assessments before interviews. Names, ages, and backgrounds remained hidden during the first stage of evaluation. Only skill mattered. Some of the highest-scoring applicants turned out to be physicians barely 30 years old. Others were experienced surgeons eager to continue learning. Professor Yoon proudly addressed the inaugural class. "In this building," he said, "titles enter last. Character enters first. The room erupted into applause. Even Dr. Park volunteered to mentor younger surgeons. His transformation surprised many people. I spent too many years believing experience meant certainty, he admitted during one lecture. Now I know experience should create curiosity. The students listened carefully. No one doubted his sincerity. Nearly a year later, the Innovation Center had become one of the hospital's greatest successes. One afternoon, Dr. Amina gathered a group of residents around an interactive digital heart model. The case involved a rare congenital defect remarkably similar to the one that had nearly cost Dohayan his life. A nervous resident named Layla hesitated before presenting her findings. I'm probably wrong. Amina folded her arms with a warm smile. Then, let's learn together. Layla carefully explained her diagnosis. When she finished, the room became quiet. Several senior residents exchanged surprised glances. Her reasoning was excellent. Professor Yoon, observing from the back of the room, smiled proudly. After the session ended, Layla remained behind. There was a time, she admitted, when I almost left medicine. People kept telling me I looked too young. They said patients would never trust me. Amina remembered hearing those same words. She gently placed a hand on Layla's shoulder. They weren't measuring your future. They were measuring their imagination. Layla's eyes filled with emotion. I'll remember that. So, will your future patients? Nearby, Dohayan quietly witnessed the conversation without interrupting. He realized the Innovation Center had already become something greater than he had imagined. It wasn't simply producing exceptional surgeons. It was producing exceptional mentors. 1 year after the operation, Hanoi Prestige Medical Institute hosted an international medical symposium attended by physicians from around the world. Delegates toured the Innovation Center with admiration. Medical journals praised its teaching philosophy. Hospitals across Asia began adopting similar training models. That afternoon, Dohayan returned for his annual cardiac examination. The results were excellent. Professor Yoon smiled as he reviewed the final scan. I believe you've officially graduated from my patient list. Dohayan laughed. I'll miss the lectures. You'll survive. Leaving the consultation room, he wandered through the Innovation Center. Inside one classroom, Amina stood before dozens of young physicians discussing a complex surgical case. She encouraged every question, listened to every perspective, corrected mistakes with patience rather than criticism. The confidence filling the room was unmistakable. When the session ended, she stepped into the quiet corridor overlooking Seoul. Dohayan joined her. They've become remarkable. They've always had the potential, she replied. They simply needed someone to believe in them. He nodded thoughtfully. When people ask why I trusted a doctor everyone else underestimated, he said, I tell them something very simple. She looked toward him. I didn't trust your age. I trusted your integrity. Amina smiled. And you gave others permission to do the same. Below them, ambulances continued arriving. Doctors hurried through bright corridors. Patients entered the hospital carrying hope. Some were treated by experienced professors, others by physicians only beginning their careers. But no one questioned whether youth alone determined ability anymore. As the evening sun cast golden light across the Han River, the camera slowly pulled back from the hospital's glass facade. Inside those walls, lives continued to be saved, not because people looked the part, but because they had earned the trust to fulfill it. And for every young doctor who walked through those doors wondering whether they truly belonged, Hanoi Prestige Medical Institute had become living proof that excellence is never measured by age, only by the lives it changes.